talk a lot about the cultivation of confidence in my work and how each brain pattern type will embody that differently. Confidence is something that we create, and it's not something that we're just innately born with. Confidence is something that you acquire through repetition.
Bizzie, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
Absolutely. My first and most important question is, how are you doing? Like for real, how are you doing?
I'm doing really good. I'm one of those people that no matter what's going on in my life, I'm not lying when I say I feel good. It's probably one of my faults is that I always look on the bright side and I'm possibly unrealistically optimistic, and that's gotten me into trouble in my life. But I'm good. I feel good. I'm feeling a little tired from being on podcast tour, but I'm just so happy with where I'm at in my life. I got four beautiful kids. I've got an amazing husband. I got no complaints. How about
Yeah.
you?
Dude, I'm right there with you, man. Yeah, I think I'm a very optimistic guy. Definitely always like glass definitely more than halfway full for the most part. Um, yeah, I mean, that's one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you specifically is because my wife is pregnant and we're expecting our first child.
Mazel
And
tov.
thank you. And I feel like obviously now that you have four kids, you have some deep insights on how to be a high achiever and still take care of your mental health while also taking care of your kids and being someone at the home. I know you and I are different genders, so maybe it's not the same thing or whatever. But I think there's
So
there's
I
still some
actually have a
things to
unique
learn.
perspective on that too that we could probably talk about because I think far too often we societally attribute things to male female that really from my research has more to do with our brain pattern. So
Mm.
you and I may actually have a very similar brain pattern type and see the world and behave very similarly even though I'm a woman and you're a man.
Yeah, that's I mean, just everything that I've read about you, like we seem very similar in that regard. But before we jump into that sort of deep end, I do want to talk about mental health because it's probably the most important, sort of general topic that I think about on this podcast. So, just how do you specifically think about this idea of mental health?
Mental health or mental health issues? Which one? Mental health, like the health of our mental state, or mental health issues specifically?
Um, yeah, let's say mental health issues. Probably we'll jump in there.
Okay. I think where our society has started to take mental health issues from a perspective of labeling, where they're observing a group of shared characteristics and then they're saying these shared characteristics belong in this category or in this category. I look at it more from the input rather than the output. So if you're observing characteristics and you're saying this cluster of characteristics gives you the output of ADHD, or this cluster makes you look like you have schizophrenia, my work is much more focused on what inputs are generating those behavioral outputs. And at the base level, I think mental health crises have to do with the distorted perception of reality. So rather than looking at the cluster of symptoms, which you or I could have very similar symptoms, but what caused those symptoms could be very different. And if we try to treat based on the symptom, one of us may be helped and then the other may not. And I think that's frequently what happens in mental health is if we're trying to treat symptoms, we're never truly addressing the cause of those symptoms. Everything's essentially an assumption. So, mental health crises or mental health issues or mental illness is a fracturing of their perception of reality that is in turn then informing emotional responses and behaviors that we would observe and label as dysregulated. So, I think it has everything to do with perception of reality.
Do you think our genetics have anything to do with maybe having a predisposition for certain things like that?
I think it's used right now societally as an excuse, which I think is really dangerous and harmful to actually helping humanity heal. Is it a factor? A million percent. I think they've proven that there's definitely a contributing aspect of it. But we know through the field of epigenetics that things can be turned on or off. So having a predisposition doesn't mean that that is what you will become, especially if your environment does not further augment those sort of symptoms to come out. So I think this is why in my work, I'm very much focused on talking about the data that we've studied for the last 11 years and how important it is to remember that 90% or more of what makes us who we are is absolutely our nurture environment, which you as a, soon to be dad, it's very important for us to remember that the environment that we create for our kids, that's everything. Because you can overcome a genetic predisposition by being the one that breaks the chain for your family. And we forget that. And putting genetics as this kind of like catch all reason or cause for everything, I think will keep us stuck in a loop of emotional chaos and basically send humanity into the abyss.
Yeah. I think you can say the same thing sort of about like evolutionary biology. Like people
Mhm.
say like I do this simply because it's my evolution, it's my I like people of my gender have been doing this forever, so this is why I do this thing and there's no way for me to ever like that's just a fucking cop out. Now,
Totally
these
agree.
are nice reasons, these are nice explanations potentially. These are nice maybe foundational aspects for me to then learn more about myself from. So now I have an overall concept of potentially where this behavior might have come from, like a couple thousand years ago, and why we evolved to do it now. I think that's beautiful and fantastic information to understand about ourselves and human nature. But then it's not just like this reason then to sit on the couch and do nothing about it, because we have like all of the I don't know fucking information that we feel like we're good, and then we just do nothing. That's sort of a no question there, but anything to riff off that.
Yeah, it's I think it's lazy. And when we I think sometimes, and I don't know, I'm seeing a menorah in your background, so I'm gonna assume that you have some understanding of a biblical paradigm from the Old Testament. I think if we were made in God's image and we know what happened in the earliest parts of the Old Testament, we know that we essentially fell into a world that was overcome with the darkest aspects of humanity. And it's our job here, I mean, at least from a Jewish perspective, tikkun olam, to do what we can to heal ourselves so that we can heal the collective and keep making the place that we live in a better place. If we start to look at all this information and say, oh, well, this information says that I'm just going to be like this whether I try or not, then it's just like, I'll just use that as a way to justify or rationalize being lazy. I think that stands in direct opposition with pretty much any ancient spiritual text you could lean on, but especially that from the biblical paradigm, where information, if you think about it, for example, in Genesis at the time of the fall, we fell because of information. So sometimes we can learn so much information that we then use it as a weapon against ourselves or against humanity to stay stuck. And one of the things that frustrates me the most about the current mental health paradigm is that we have forgotten or have pushed away this idea that healing is possible. Now everything is about labeling, coping, adapting, medicating, and telling people you're just like this. It's your genetics. You can't help it, right? Alcoholism, it's a disease. You can't help it, which puts people in this disempowered state that essentially excuses laziness. My work stands in direct opposition to this, which is I believe every single person in the world, no matter what their symptom pattern looks like, has the ability to radically heal if you're doing the right work in the right timing. Because I think timing is everything. So I think sometimes we can, especially now in 2025, where with the how AI is coming into all of our daily lives and constant access to information, we can easily use information as a way to stay stuck. And I encourage anyone listening here, if information made Eve fall and have us all experience what we're experiencing right now, be very mindful that more information doesn't necessarily solve your problems, just like more money tends to cause problems rather than solve them.
Yeah, we always feel like we need everything to sort of be perfect before we start instead of just starting and sort of figuring it out
Hmm.
along the way. I mean, there's a great book. I forgot who it's uh, by, but the title is "Everything Is Figure Outable," and I just think
Hmm.
that's like, you know, that's amazing. And that's how I sort of approach my life. I don't need all of the information. I need some of it. Same reason why I started this podcast with not even a microphone, and I think my mom was holding the camera. Like I could have gotten one. It was only like 4 or 5 years ago. It's not like that stuff wasn't invented or like it was not hard to buy. It just was like fuck it. I'm just gonna okay, we're gonna start it. Let's see how it goes. And then you tweak along the way to see if it's actually something that aligns with you, something that is meaningful for your life, and something that could add value for it. Then you're like, okay, now I have more information, I have more experience, I can add this to this. And I also think in sort of in the mental health space, it's too much about awareness. I cannot stand
Oh, yeah.
that it's mental health awareness. I like we need got to move past that And like I think personally mental health needs like a real sexier rebrand because that's the only way
I think that's
people
what my
are.
company does.
Right, exactly. That's the
Definitely
only
trying
way
to.
people are going to buy into the idea that mental health is not this like this looming black cloud or like it's like this weird person who sits darkly in the corner like thinking about dark thought. It's just like everything that we all experience all the time. And so instead of being aware of it, that's great. We're aware of it. Let's like move into mental health action. And I think that's what you're talking about, like actual behaviors, processes, systems, routines, whatever you want to call it, can actually then start to move the needle forward to make sure that you have an idea of how you're thinking and feeling and moving in the world, and you can be the best version of yourself and whatever that looks like in your life. And I think that's way more important than anything else as regards to our mental health.
I couldn't agree more. One of the main constructs of what we do is that awareness is not enough, and unless awareness becomes not just general action but very specific strategic action, somebody won't actually effectively rewire because willpower is not a solution. And I think awareness requires willpower, and awareness means that you have to consciously override your behaviors by way of having more information. But we know that this doesn't actually work. Somebody could go read a book, a self-help book for example, and they could learn all the reasons why they're failing in intimate relationships, and that's all good and fine, and it's committed to semantic memory. You could give them a test and they could get 100%, but what's going to happen when they go out on a date? Their subconscious takes over. All the knowledge that they learned is as useful as the War of 1812 in that moment that they're sitting across from a person that they have feelings for. So that's the work that I do, is always addressing that more foundational subconscious layer and how our brain not only constructs reality, but then in turn assumes and restricts the choices that we're even perceiving in any moment. Because the reality is, it sounds like just a little bit from kind of understanding you, you or I probably have the exact same brain pattern type. So even the book, Everything is Figure Outable, that's a book that is probably part and parcel to who you are naturally, where everybody else will be uber triggered by probably much of what they read in that book because it stands in direct opposition to the strategies that their brain developed to survive their world. You or I are the way we are because our brain decided that is the effective strategy to navigate life at an early age, right? So it made us adaptable, flexible, spontaneous, and we had a high level of self-trust. So when faced with hardship, you or I probably actually become scrappy and actually have our most creative like pivots in thinking. When really bad things happen to me, I actually like become even better. So anytime someone's ever tried to come for me or take me down, I'm like, welcoming it, because every time someone's ever tried to come for me, I 10x that year. So most people aren't like that. Most people, as soon as they get any sort of negative feedback where they're not getting the validation that they're seeking, they're going to take that as a failure and start to spin out and have trouble methodically moving forward or generating momentum. You or I probably get even more momentum. But I
Yeah.
think that's, in my work, that is what I study, is how the repetitive childhood inputs between the ages of 2 and 4 ultimately create a brain pattern that is like an operating system in a computer. And there's only 5 operating systems in all of humanity. So you can take 8 billion people, and 8 billion people have 5 different versions of an operating system, and that will predict everything we need to know about that person and how they will experience reality, how they will choose to respond to something, and even how they'll choose to respond in an intimate relationship different from career. So we're actually very predictable creatures. And while we feel unique and individual, and certainly I believe our spirit is seeing through a lens of glass that is very distorted by the rules and formulas that we create in our early childhood.
Mm. Before I ask you about those five things,
Mhm.
um, do you think your background in sports had anything to do with the way you think and feel, or you think that was already like intrinsically in you before you got into sports?
So, in our brain pattern mapping test, there are some questions about people's sports background and whether they would describe themselves as competitive or not. I think naturally my brain pattern type made me great at sports, versus other people's brain pattern types might make sports something that actually is very triggering, and maybe it's hard for them to actually um like show up and connect with people. So I'm just thinking, I coach my son's soccer team, so I get to kind of watch all these different brain pattern types in the form of 11, 12, and 13-year-olds. And you can see the kids who have self-trust, they have self-efficacy, they're not like showing up to the game still kind of like grabbing onto mom's arm. and they get out on the field and they hustle for me and they do exactly what I tell them to do. And then you have the kids that are a little bit more timid. They're naturally standing a little bit closer to mom. They're not as quick to talk to me or ask me questions. So you can see that even in a sports sort of environment like soccer, different brain pattern types are going to approach a game or competition very differently. So there are certain brain pattern types that are likely to be great at anything they do, which is why I think we see, I think I've seen this described as a phenomenon. I don't think it's a phenomenon because I think we understand, at least from my work, I understand exactly where it comes from. How you can have somebody that is really great in one sport, and then you pivot them to a different sport and they're also great, and then you pivot them to a different sport, they're also great. It's not that that person, is some sort of like, unique unicorn. It's that their brain pattern, when faced with any new information set, because they have self trust and self efficacy, and maybe they're good at listening or taking that information and putting it into physicality within their body, you can keep turning that to any sport and they would keep crushing it. I remember I went to a boarding school in Colorado for competitive skiers and snowboarders in high school, and one of my friends was a very well known, very famous skier. And this one day, someone made a bet with him, like, bro, you can't take that snowboard into the train park. And he's like, yes, I can. They're like, you've never snowboarded before. He's like, I don't give a shit. Give me the snowboard. And next thing you know, it's been like an hour and the kid's hucking off of tabletops. Like, why is that? On one hand, it's because his brain pattern type has a unique framework around positive self deception. If he thinks that he can do anything, he's much more likely to pull it off. Somebody that's naturally more control oriented and timid and like wants to know how to do something before they try, they're going to get stuck in their head, and their freeze response is probably going to make them suck at snowboarding the first, I don't know, like year that they try. So I think big picture, it's more likely that my brain pattern made me good at sports. And then by continuing to do sports, it just kind of like kept bolstering my self trust because I got better and better. And I realized that anything I set out to do, I can do. But I think it's less that sports made me this way and more that my brain pattern made me great at sports.
Hmm. Interesting. Yeah, it's cool that you keep saying self-trust, because when I think about that, I think about confidence, because I've defined confidence as intense trust in oneself. And so you using it is like my brain is like making parallels. Like, of course, self-trust, that means confidence. You're going into these environments, not knowing if you can do good at the thing, but still going in the environment anyways, which is the idea of confidence or self-trust. So it just, I don't know, it just makes a lot of sense to me.
I talk a lot about the cultivation of confidence in my work and how each brain pattern type will embody that differently. Confidence is something that we create, and it's not something that we're just innately born with. Confidence is something that you acquire through repetition. So one of the things that's important is understanding the cycle of creating confidence. And you're right that self-trust is a huge factor that influences whether we're going to do that thing or not, to learn that it's something that we can now hold as a capability. So I like to think of confidence using something called the 4 C's. So when you look at what confidence is, pick anything. So I like to use the example of, let's say I want to go base jumping. For me to go base jumping, I have to first commit to going base jumping. I can't, like, in my head, a lot of people, I want to do all these things, but it's an idea. They're not actually committed to the act of doing it. It's just something that exists in their mind. So ultimately, people that have real confidence that actually become successful in the world, the very first thing that they're good at doing is committing based on what they want. So that's something that, as you can imagine, a lot of people struggle with commitment.
Mm,
So I know people that maybe would tell you I'm a confident person, but if you actually look at the track record of their life, they have more of a freeze or flight response and protection. So they might feel confident, like I could do that if I had to, but they're not actually taking the step to commit to do it. So step number one to build confidence is you have to commit. Step number two is you have to have courage. If I want to go base jumping, I have to commit to going to put my base jumping rig on my back, and I have to go to the mountain. And not only do I have to go to the mountain, I have to step to the edge. Once I'm at the edge, I have to be courageous enough to throw my body off of the mountain. So, where some people get stuck is they commit to it, but then they do this push, pull, start, stop when they get to the edge. So, you also have to go into a courageous state, which, as an example, I talked a little bit about positive self deception. If somebody believes I can do this, even if maybe the factual record is like they could totally die, if they believe it, they're going to be more likely to courageously huck their body off the edge. Then when they land their feet on the ground and they look back, they're like, holy shit, I just went base jumping. Then they have this surge of confidence. Like, I can do this. I committed. I threw myself off the edge because I was courageous. And now I actually did that shit. Now it becomes a capability because now I know that if I just follow that step sequence, I can do anything. As long as I commit and I'm courageous, I can do it. I can land. And then I've realized this is something that is a capability. I can turn this skill set or this sequence on anything in the world. So self-trust has to precede all those steps, but ultimately to build confidence, real confidence that's not based in seeking validation from somebody else, but generated from within, you have to move through that sequence, which only then further bolsters your self trust, right? Because then you feel invincible and you feel like a badass.
Yeah. Do you actually want to go do that? Is that something you're trying to do?
I've never really thought about it, but I mean, probably. When it comes to things like that, I'm, I have no problem being reckless with things that are like upside down heights. Like, I love crazy roller coasters, all of that. My kryptonite is elevators, and I know that sounds absolutely absurd, but like, I hate elevators. There's nothing, I've tried everything in the world. And I know I've done work around it, and if I absolutely have to get on one, I'll do it. But I grew up on the 41st floor of a building in New York City, and I've just like from a young age, it gives my body this incredible sensation of fight or flight every time I go on one. And I navigated through it my whole life, and that was fine. And I finally, this one day, and of course, this is how it would work out. One day, I had done so much work that I was like, I'm not afraid of elevators anymore. And I walk onto an elevator with my best friend in the fashion district in LA, and what happens? Blackout. And I get stuck in this elevator for 3 hours.
Oh no.
And typically, in this sort of dynamic between my best friend and I, she's usually the one that's like, when it comes to like crazy stuff like scuba diving and that kind of stuff, she's like even crazier than I am. And as soon as this happened, she lost her marbles. So I realized very quickly, oh crap, like I'm gonna have to keep it together for both of us because we can't both lose it right now. So I spent the entire time. Do you know the Jerky Boys?
The Jerky Boys?
Yeah, so it was basically this like comedian prank thing that they would do where they'd like make all these prank phone calls and call. I don't, you might be significantly younger than me, but on the East Coast, way back when I was in like high school, the Jerky Boys were a big deal. But basically,
Okay.
to keep her laughing and focused, I kept hitting the call button, and even though no one was there, I kept making up both voices and was doing like a whole comedy skit just to keep her laughing the whole time. I did that for hours. And when the doors opened, I remember walking out and flopping myself on the ground and just saying, I am never getting back in an elevator ever again. Like, I'm not doing that ever again. And I have, but I just try to reduce my exposure as much as possible. So I'll be crazy, but to me, being like trapped or confined against my will, that is much scarier than like hucking myself off a mountain because I'm not afraid of dying. Like, that's
Mhm.
not actually a fear that I have. I'm afraid of being trapped or held captive against my will. That to me is way worse.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that. In terms of being held captive, that would be awful. But anyways, back to this idea of confidence. It's like, especially like in the sports world, you can easily tell like this sort of fake, arrogant person like right from the jump. I mean, they get exposed quickly. They think they don't have to work anymore. They're all good. Everything's nice. It's perfect. And then they run up against an actual challenge or potentially someone who's a little bit better than them or potentially even the same skill level as them. And they get exposed quickly and they wonder why. They're like, I do all the things. And it's like you realize it's sort of, if it's pretend, it's not built in any real sort of foundational aspect. And I think, and I coach youth baseball, and so a lot of these young kids now, what they see on the internet with all these athletes with the chains and the swag and all of this, they start to develop that a little bit, and it sort of borderline leans into this idea of being a little bit arrogant. And youth sports have also been taken over by rankings and money, and the NIL stuff has trickled down into youth sports, and it's kind of a ridiculous charade. And so you see that a lot with these young people. But then I think like is that the worst thing that could happen? Can we just like sort of transfer that over to confidence a little bit easier, or is it better to have them sort of be this timid kid and try to lift them up into being a more confident person? And I mean, nothing. I don't know if it hasn't worked perfectly, but I feel like some of it is okay if you can transfer that into the right energy, especially if it's like a, 12, 13, 14-year-old boy. Potentially you can then lead that into having real confidence, especially if he's played a couple years. He has like credible evidence. He's earned the right to say some of these things to himself. But I've just been thinking about that idea a little bit.
I think it all will boil down to what structures you as the coach impart into the team environment. So an example would be kids are still relatively malleable. So even if that's how the kids kind of show up presenting, there's a large part of that that is a byproduct of how their parents engage with them. And this is why I encourage so many of my families that have young kids to get their kids in sports right away. Because sometimes the coach and how they set up their structure or their discipline or their expectations differently is exactly what that kid needed to get out of their own way because their parents are parenting a certain way, which are allowing like the arrogance or being timid. You, as the coach, if you do it correctly and you essentially demand or earn their respect, whatever your style is, eventually kids are malleable enough that you could be exactly the input that they needed to change and change for the better. Because I don't think any kid is going to be restricted at that point. They might be, like you said, there's some more of the arrogant ones who have kind of more of the false confidence, more of the timid ones where you kind of don't even know what they're capable of because they won't push themselves. You could put all those kids in the same team, and if you, as the coach, are very clear on what you do and why you do it, and you're like pushing all of them through the gauntlet, they could all you could easily turn all of them into that the kid with self-efficacy, with self-trust that's actually going to drive toward a goal, just by way of being different than the parents.
Yeah.
Because that environment, especially with sports, because you're doing it in repetition. Sometimes you're meeting them. I don't know how often you meet with your kids, but with my kids it's at least 3 times a week because we've got 2 practices and a game, and sometimes we've got multiple games on weekends. So you've now created this environment where you now get to essentially help shift that kid's brain pattern in addition to their parents. And sometimes your job as the coach is to counter what the parents are doing. And I think that's where kids sometimes benefit. 'Cause a lot of the ways parents parent their kids is part of the problem. And that's a lot of the cleanup duty that I have to do in my work, is that parents will come to me with their hands up, like, why is my kid a monster? And then when we really reverse engineer it, it's like, do you want to know the truth? Like, your kid's a monster because of the way you parented them. So it's you. You are the problem. So as a coach, you get to undo and unwind a lot of that because kids often, they're hungry for what they're not getting, even if they can't articulate that. So you might get a kid that maybe for the first few times that they're meeting with you, they present more oppositional or they're like trying to test you. But if you stay consistent and you build that structure that they can learn to navigate within, a lot of times you can get a kid to change in like 2 weeks, 3 weeks, if you just stay consistent and you don't cower to how they're presenting.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, especially young boys nowadays are fucking starving for a strong, like actual masculine man who like lines up his words and actions, who shows up, who does the things he says he's gonna do, and they're like, oh fuck. Like I'm a pretty big guy. I'm like 6'2", 240 pounds, right? So I'm bigger than most of these kids. Some of them are fucking huge at 13, and I'm not bigger than them, and it's wild. But for the most part, they're like, oh man, I could be like this one day, or whatever the case may be. Not that they're saying it out loud, but there's a vision they see for their future, and so it's pretty. If you do it the right way, there's a great responsibility to being a coach, and you can earn their trust right away. And then once they know that you care about them, you can pretty much give them any sort of feedback, and they'll receive it in a great way. If the first thing you do to them is start yelling at them, they're like, no. But if you show them care and love and support, and then you start giving them maybe the harsher critiques or feedback, they're going to receive that very, very well, and they want that because they want to improve. There's a hunger for that, especially boys nowadays, and maybe some of the stuff they see on social that's not as let's say productive, maybe is the right word.
Hmm. And with both the arrogant and the timid kid, most likely at home, their parents are not teaching them how to accurately self measure. So one doesn't know what they're capable of because the parents are kind of just always being nice and always kind of like, in a way, being so nice that they're breeding mediocrity, or their kid doesn't like, they're happy with where they're at. So they're kind of just complacent. Then the arrogant kid, the parents probably do the same thing, but then the kid actually starts to believe it and they're like, I am the shit. Either way, both those kids need to actually learn how to accurately self measure and learn when something's good or bad or not enough effort or enough effort. When I first, every season that I start for soccer, I circle all the kids up because usually the parents have to come too. Circle all the kids up and I say, hey guys, I'm gonna break this down for each of you, and then you guys are going to get to vote on it because, this is a democracy. You guys are, I coach like U13, U14. Like, you guys are old enough. Do you want to win this season, or do you all want equal playing time? Because we can't have both. If
Mm,
you all want equal playing time, we will not win this season. That's just facts. Not You guys are not all the same level of player.
yeah.
So, do you want to win this season, or do you want equal playing time and to focus on fairness? Because that's going to determine how I coach this season. So we go around, every kid's like, I want to win, I want to win, I want to win, I want to. And the first time I did this, you could tell, I was also doing this to watch some of the parents squirm. I'm like, okay, I know who the problems are right now. So then afterwards, I look at the parents, I'm like, so you saw that. These kids want to win. That means that there are going to be certain players that might get a little bit more field time. And I do not want to have any parent come to me and say, this isn't fair, or my kid needs to be out there more. I have a strategy. I use that strategy with my kids. They know a week ahead of time how we're going to rotate everything out. So for you parents who are going to come to games, don't sit there with your timer and be like, my kid needs 5 more minutes. No, they decided they wanted to win. And we've had 3 seasons of being undefeated because of this. And I do make sure that kids are getting out there, but at the same time, I'm not just gonna like keep putting a kid out because it's fair, even if he's not actually learning or growing. I will tell a kid, hey, if you want to up your playtime, this is what I need you to do during practice this week. Work on this, work on this. And then I'll go up to them and give them positive feedback. Buddy, that was amazing. I'm gonna start you next week. That's what actually helps kids get better, not doing this whole everything needs to be fair, everybody gets equal playtime. And I think that's just one example of how a coach in that environment can use that repetitive experience to help a kid grow and heal, because I've seen kids that have come in at the beginning of the season leave badasses where even their parents are like, "Damn, my kid changed this season." I'm like, "They changed because I'm tough, but I'm also loving. I'm encouraging them, but I'm not going to blow smoke and make them think that they're better than they are, because that's setting them up for failure in their future."
Mhm. Yeah, and there's a powerful thing that happens there that once the kid like actually sees himself improving and feels it, that skill then he feels or she feels that skill can then be applied to literally everywhere in their life. And
Mm-hmm.
like that's why so many athletes, yeah, sometimes we go through identity crisis and things of that nature, of course, but we feel like we can apply almost any skill everywhere because like we'll just sort it out. I started playing baseball at 4. I got good when I was like 20. Took me 16 years. Okay, well I can get pretty much good at anything in 16 years, like literally anything.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not like being like a astronaut or something because I don't think I'm smart enough for that. But like you get my point. You get my point. And so I think that's why it's such a valuable skill for sports because like majority of us are not going to make millions of dollars playing sports, which is fine, but there's just like so many lessons about life and teamwork and resilience and effort and things that you get out if you earn it and all of this stuff. And it's
I think
unfortunate that
it's
nowadays.
really one of the most important things to prioritize for your children. And I do have clients where they'll be like, well, I just really feel like my kid's just so much more aligned with art classes. And I was like, I'm going to level with you. That's even more reason why you should put them into basketball or soccer or lacrosse, because the real world isn't going to behave like art class. The real world is going to behave like sports. So you are handicapping your kid by just trying to put on bumpers and keep everything soft and sweet, because then they're going to get out into the world and it's going to feel like the world is out to get them, when really you handicapped them and didn't teach them how to deal with the world when the stakes were lower. Because, right, the stakes are lower in a game. What's going to happen? You get some bad feedback. Maybe you're going to cry for a few days if you didn't get the medal, whatever, whatever. That's very different than being an adult and getting fired from your job and being broke because you didn't learn the lesson when you were 11.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's go back to you mentioned the operating systems. What are the 5 operating systems?
Let's take a look at all the 9 markers that we look at in brain pattern mapping. I'll give a little bit of info on what brain pattern mapping is, and then we can talk about kind of how those 5 cluster together. So, our brain pattern is going to be that byproduct of our early childhood repetitive experiences. So, for each one of us, we're going to have slightly different ones, but they're general themes that tend to generally output certain behaviors. So, one of the things that I cover in my book is how certain cultures and or religions have a tendency to cultivate very specific brain pattern types. So, for example, Indian culture, Chinese culture, there's a very specific sort of operating system that their culture tries to create, right? And we talked a little bit about how really nurture far outweighs our nature. So when a culture is very intentional and very secure, and they've held that culture for hundreds and thousands of years, right? Like, I immediately think of Japan and how Japanese culture is something that's actually been largely uninterrupted from beginning to end. That rarely happens. When you have something like that that's so concentrated over time, that intensity of the environment is going to be even more likely to output a brain pattern variance that's like in a very small set. So for example, maybe like in US culture, we're kind of spread out throughout all 5 brain pattern types. In Chinese culture, you might be spread out between 2, and there
Mm.
might be 3 that like pretty much no one ever has. Same is going to be true in Indian culture. Then if you shift your thinking to a culture like Russia or Germany, where there's a little bit more harshness, where it's, in my opinion, from working with clients that are from these countries, there's definitely this sense in how you're being raised that like you as an individual don't matter. It's what you have to do for the group or kind of your role in the greater good. That input over time is going to force you to think about everybody else instead of yourself first. While there are certain other brain pattern types that are very focused on what I have to do to perform to uphold my family name. So essentially, you could have 2 cultures that ultimately care about the way they're perceived, but the pathway there is different.
Mm.
One is acts of service for people outside of self, while the other is what I can do personally to achieve so that I keep my family's reputation in high regard.
Mm.
So when we look at the brain pattern spectrum, it's something that can be divided in left or right halves with the 5 brain pattern types spread across them. The right side of the brain pattern spectrum are all rejection oriented patterns, and the left side of the spectrum are all abandonment oriented patterns. In general, abandonment oriented patterns have a tendency to lack trust in other. So they're more likely to trust themselves and be discerning about anybody else. They're not so quick to give away their authority. They're not so quick to look to hierarchy as a way to solve a problem. They're going to likely be more scrappy and try to figure things out as they go along. So if you were to start in the middle of the spectrum and move your way out to the left side, as you go to the left, your self trust is going to increase. So, for example, if you're all the way to the left, you're going to have higher self trust than if you're kind of in the middle. So, every time you move, self trust goes up. We're going to also see situational awareness increase. So, you're becoming increasingly aware of your surroundings. This can actually become something where you are too aware and you start to become paranoid. So, if
Mm.
you think about like some of the operators like special forces, Green Berets, right? Their job is to be so aware of what's going on in their environment that it might seem like they're not present in a conversation with you because they're thinking about everything that's happening. They're watching someone's facial expression from far away. They know where all their exits are. It's hard to be focused on those inputs while also be in a conversation like this. I'm going to be missing nuance in like your facial expression or your voice tone because I'm trying to be too aware of what's happening around me. So if you go all the way to the left, that's where we would start to see more of a paranoia presentation, where essentially, if you trust everything that you're thinking and you are taking in an extensive amount of information from your external world, you can get yourself to a place where you don't know what to take action on or not anymore. So you can present as paranoid. Another thing that tends to happen is every time you move to the left, you become more and more independent. So at a certain point, hyper independence may turn into isolation.
Mm.
Because if you've got everything handled by yourself and you don't need anybody, eventually you really will believe I don't need anybody. All of those things top out on that far left side. So what we have is I'm overly aware of what's happening in my environment. I trust everything I'm thinking. So right, no ability to stop and pause and be like, am I sure? Like maybe that's an assumption. And I've isolated myself. So now there's no one to be like, hey bro, I don't think that's not the right move here. So there's nobody to give you feedback. You're just lone wolf. That's where we see schizophrenia sort of presentations and other, even certain types of bipolar. Those can be all the way on that far left side. Then if you go back to the center and you fan out to the right side instead, you're going to see self-trust go down. So every time I move to the right, I'm going to have less and less self-trust. And what ends up happening is that means I'm actually looking to somebody else to solve my problems. So if I can't solve it, that means other can, whether that's hierarchy, whether that's someone famous, right? So we're looking outside of ourselves to how to solve a problem. That, as you can imagine, eventually will lead people not toward hyper independence, but toward codependency, where I can't make a decision unless you tell me that this is the right thing to do. So as you go all the way to that far right side, we see codependency or even dependency if you go all the way to the right, where people all the way to that far right side. So basically the mirrored opposite of that kind of paranoid like operator that's completely isolated lone wolf. You have the opposite of that, which is somebody who can't keep a job, can't keep any sort of routine, is still living at mom or dad's house. They're paying all their bills. They everything in life feels futile and they do nothing with themselves. They just believe nothing matters. So we kind of go from all the way independent to a point where you don't talk to anybody all the way to everyone has to do everything for me because I'm basically an adult baby. We also see that on the right hand side, as situational awareness is going down because you're significantly less situationally aware on the right hand side, you also become fixated on on interpersonal interaction. So instead of being kind of balanced between what's happening out here and what's happening with your facial expressions, now I'm fixated on it and I'm trying to figure out what you're thinking about me, which of course is going to be a projection. I'm not in your head. I can make an educated guess. But if everything I'm doing is trying to read all of your subtle body cues, I'm gonna be like, oh my God, what if he doesn't like me? What if he thinks I'm dumb? Right? And all of that would be based in fabrication or insecurity, which is also very common on that right hand side. So then that person becomes very situationally unaware because they're fixated on what others think and feel. Knowing what I've just described to you, can you see where in the United States in particular, where we are right now, there are a lot of people on this right hand side?
Mm-hmm.
So many. And
Yes.
things like social media are largely to blame for this. There are also patterns of causation that are coming from some of our generational shifts in parenting techniques because what we parent is what will present out in the world. So a lot of this concentration of these right-sided brain pattern types, it is coming from parents who are coddling, who are enabling their children, and who are tricking their kids into thinking that they're better than things than they really are by celebrating mediocrity or telling people everybody's a winner. And on top of that, allowing the kid to continue to be self-centered. So one of the things that you will find when are you having a girl or boy? Do you know yet?
Boy.
Boy. So one of the things that you will find is as your boy's aging, in toddler years, they play around with self-centeredness, right? They're trying to figure out like, who am I different from you? There's this like, I want mentality. And a lot of parents mistakenly think they're gonna outgrow it. Like, oh, it's so cute. Like if your kid just like blatantly lies to your face, it's like, oh, that's so cute that they're making that up. It's not cute. You should actually work on helping them move through this because kids are so much more malleable at that age than they are at those teenage years. So if you as a coach can radically change their life, which I see clients all the time in their 40s, 50s, 60s who are like, thank God I did XYZ sport because that actually was the thing I needed to get out of my own way. So if kids can change at 14, if you do it right between 2 and 4, we can all prevent our children from ever having to deal with any of the drama or chaos that we do, that we're trying to spend all these years cleaning up. When we look at something like these early childhood years, you can help your child realize I am not the center of the universe. I should not always get my way. And when I lie to make myself feel better, a parent should lovingly help pull me out of that distortion because that will persist. I like this example because we're already on the sports topic. So, my youngest daughter, Harley, is 4. And when she first started playing soccer, after her first game, I wasn't there because her dad coaches her team. After a game, I was like, hey, so did you score any goals? She's like, yeah, I scored 5 goals. And I, like, in my mind, I'm like, really? Like, what? That doesn't sound right. So I go to my husband, I'm like, hey, babe, did Harley score any goals? And he's like, no, dude, no one scored goals. It was a nightmare. Everyone like ran around in circles. I was like, okay, good teaching moment. So I can see where a parent might think, oh, that's cute. But what's really happening is she doesn't like the way the game turned out. So her brain is manufacturing a narrative that makes her feel better about the game. That will persist and turn into something actually very sinister. I believe those are some of the things that become personality disorders as they keep moving unchecked. So instead of just being like, oh, that's cute, no big deal. I went up to her, I'm like, hey, I talked to dad. Dad's your coach, right? And she's like, yeah, daddy's my coach. Teddy says no one scored any goals today. And she was like, hmm. And I was like, did you try really hard today? And she's like, yeah, I tried really hard. I'm like, so did it feel kind of like a bummer maybe at the end of the game if nobody scored any goals? And she's like, yeah. And I'm like, so why'd you tell me that you scored 5 goals? She's like, I don't know. I'm like, well, do you think maybe you were trying to make yourself feel better? And she's like, yeah, maybe. And I'm like, it's okay to feel frustrated after a game, but lying about it to make yourself feel better, that's not a good thing. We don't ever want to lie to mommy. So, do you want to say anything? And she's like, yeah, I'm sorry. And I'm like, do you want to practice your, scoring goals this afternoon? Let's go grab the soccer ball. Let's work on it because you're not going to start scoring goals just by lying about it to make yourself feel better, you know? So little moments like that where it's not like shaming your kid like you liar, right? That's not what we're saying to do here. But it's like asking the right questions for your child to start to see where they are distorting reality themselves. They can be like, "Huh, yeah, I did lie." I'm like, "Do you want to lie to mom?" No. I'm like, "Cool. Let's fix it. No big deal." So those little moments you're going to find you have a treasure trove of those day in, day out, all the time. And if you make these little micro tweaks as they're aging, kids become amazing. And people that meet my kids, especially my older ones, I mean, younger ones too, but it's easier to tell in the older ones because, for example, my son Zev, who's 11, 11-year-old kids can be like pretty awful, especially boys. When people meet my son, they literally pull me aside and they're like, I mean, what did you do? He's like smart and funny, but he like cares about everybody and he's like tough, but he's sensitive. Like, what is this? This is like, what is this? I'm like, this is break method parenting. Like this is he's been my science experiment for 11 years and I'm very proud of him. So I do know that it's possible to actually create the right inputs to give a child a chance to output this brain pattern type because I really think from everything that the data that I've collected over 11 years, all the work that we've done with the tech firm to actually kind of prove the model that we've created, there is a sweet spot where if we give these inputs, it puts the kid like right here on the spectrum, and this is the brain pattern type that reports the highest quality of life. So you could give me like a random sampling of 1,000 people. Everyone that has this brain pattern type, every time will be like, life's pretty good. No complaints here. And guess what brain pattern type that is? It's the type you and I have, and it's actually very, very small percentage of the world. Extremely small.
Really?
So we need to up that significantly, and there is a way to parent for it.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I want my son to be very, very well aware of losing early in his life. Like it's just a reality of life. Like I want you to feel that emotion. Are you angry because of it? Are you frustrated because of it? Are you motivated because of it? Okay, what are we going to do with that? Are we going to have a little extra practice? Are we going to maybe go for an ice cream because you're really feeling it? Like what is it that's exactly going on here? And then how can we then take steps to maybe improve if you actually like this thing or you want to get better at it? And because results are like that's just what life is. Life is about results. You either get the job done or you fucking don't. But if we only focus on the results, I think it constricts our ability to play loose and free and creative. But we have to
Definitely.
be aware of those, that's what like our maybe our ultimate aim is. But I'm not thinking about that every day. I'm just thinking about, like you said, my effort. What can I control? Okay, I'm just going to move forward and move forward. I didn't get the result I wanted. Okay, what can I tweak? What can I do moving forward? I mean, that's everything in life. Just sports are just like it's such an easy thing to use
Well,
as a vehicle.
or it mimics life. So you have this kind of like closed container where they get to learn lessons about life because it's a micro to a macro, right? If life is the macro, a game is a micro version of that. So every time you do it, you get to learn a whole cycle of life every time if you are present to it correctly.
Yeah.
In my work, we talk about the break parenting keystones, which you hit on a couple of them a second ago. So the number one most important thing is age appropriate truth. And if you strive for age appropriate truth with your child, that means that you're not hiding the bad. Because hiding the bad often is what creates this kind of faulty reality where the child never has to hear about anything bad or dangerous or scary. And our world can be scary, and you don't want to set your kid up for disaster by making them naive or gullible or not understanding how the world operates. So, age appropriate truth actually truly helps a child not be overly trusting and actually learn proper discernment. It also helps them mature, right? Because it's important to hear about hard things as you're growing up, because again, then you learn the skills to be emotionally resilient. Number two is teaching a child how to accurately self-measure, which I feel like we nailed, right? We got that one. Everyone has that under control. The third one, which is very important, which you just touched on a second ago naturally, is spontaneous celebration of your child. So we need something to counter this self-measurement, which is very important because it's the world that we live in. So we're setting our kids up for success. Spontaneous celebration of the child means that you celebrate them and love the shit out of them, not for what they do, but for who they are. And it has to be separated from a time that they did something. For example, let's say your kid comes home and they got an A on their spelling test. Don't do your spontaneous celebration the next day because their brain will be like, oh, they're just doing this because I got an A on my spelling test. So like I will ambush my kids at random and like grab their face and be like, I love you. You're this, you're this, you're this, you're this, you're this, right? Where you're just like speaking the life of God into them and then give them a big hug and just be like, I'm so grateful that I get to be your mom. And then they're like, God, what are you doing? Like, stop me. But then afterwards, like if there's a camera on them, they'd be smiling like, oh, mommy loves me. So that spontaneous celebration is so important to counter the measurement because they need both. Their spirit needs to know that they are perfect in God's image and a gangster all by themselves, no matter what, and you love them for who they are. Also, you need to know how to self-measure accurately. Otherwise, you're going to be set up for failure in the world. Underneath that, super important to maintain structure and discipline. And this doesn't mean like, be militant and like spank your kids. It means there have to be consequences and there have to be boundaries for a couple reasons. Number one, it does actually make kids feel safe. And if you say you're going to do something, you have to follow through on it. You can't just be like, if you do that one more time, I'm going to take away the pretzels. And then they do it. And then you keep letting them eat the pretzels. That's what creates that right side brain pattern type. So you have to be willing to follow through on the consequence that you gave. So that helps them feel safe and helps them understand boundaries. But the other part of this, I think, is even more important. To be on that left side spectrum where we know there's a high reported quality of life and a high level of self-trust, you have to give your child a structure to bump up against. So I tell people all the time, I don't want a compliant child. To me, a compliant child is the right side brain pattern child. I want a child who is willing to stand up to me and to disagree as long as they're doing it respectfully. So once you have that boundary of that kind of rule, you want your kid to understand what that is so that if they really feel like they want to do it anyways, they're willing to kind of take their lickings and meet you in that place and be like, I don't like this rule. Here's why. There have been plenty of times that my 11-year-old, through good negotiation skills, has actually convinced me to back off. Where I'm like, okay, fine, fine. You did it. You convinced me. So that's a positive skill and that shows self-trust. I was really hardcore about not letting my kid have a PlayStation for a while. And eventually we got to this age where I'm not a dummy. I'm watching kind of how his school environment is and I'm realizing not letting him do this is actually hindering him from friendships at school. So although I didn't want him to be like a video game kid, after school, a lot of them are like meeting up and they all have their headsets on. And like that's part of, back in the day when I was little, you have play dates. Now kids are literally like linking up online afterwards and playing Roblox or whatever, like Fortnite. So I had to sit with it for a while and he came to me in a very professional way of like, Mom, here's the deal. I understand all the reasons why you don't want me to have PlayStation, and I'm with you. I don't ever want to turn into that kid either. Here's all the things that I'm missing out on with my friends. Can we make a deal where maybe like I have this and I get to use it sometimes or I can earn it, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, all right, fine, you convinced me. So now he has a PlayStation and he does get to connect with his friends. But my rule with him is if you ever turn into a zombie, it's going away. If you ever start to become suddenly mysteriously disrespectful, it goes away. If your grades slip, it goes away. And if I ever say, hey, Zev, I need your help with something, or come to the table and you say, yeah, 1 second, Mom, and then don't do it right away, is going away. So those are the rules, those are the boundaries. He's like, yeah, I got it. And he's had it since October of last year. That's never once happened. Like, never had a problem with him ever. So sometimes I'll just check in with him and be like, hey, how's it going? And I personally hate video games, but I know that he's building stuff that he thinks is cool. So I'll go sometimes to his room and be like, hey, show me what you're building. Let me see. Give me a tour. So those are some examples of like, that was a hard boundary for me and it would have been hard to convince me otherwise, maybe 6 months to a year before. But I taught my son how to meet me in that place and basically stand up for himself and argue with me respectfully and intelligently. So that's something that builds a skill because they know the boundary and they're not going to like sneakily try to push it. They're going to meet you with respect and say, "Hey, I think your boundary sucks and I'm ready for that boundary to go away now." So that actually helps the kid in the long run build self-trust. Is if you have that structure and they don't fear for their physical safety on the other end of it, they're going to be likely to actually negotiate with you and learn a skill of not just being compliant, but being respectful and thinking critically.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like the Stephen Covey idea of building the emotional bank account. And both people do it. The kid does. Your son obviously did it, and he had enough in the account that he could go up to you
Mhm.
and ask you something serious to make that withdrawal. And you were like, "Oh, that's a
Yeah.
pretty good idea because I we have the trust in ourselves." It's like if you're majority of the time you do what you say you're going to do, and then that one time you fall short, but you have so much money in that emotional bank account, that apology actually means something. That withdrawal actually means something, and the kid or the player or the your spouse or whatever is like, "Yeah, 100% totally forgive you, totally get it. We have so much money that we've put into this emotional bank account." Now that I'm going with this analogy, that it's okay. But if you majority of the time don't actually do what you say you're going to do, then it doesn't even fucking matter.
True. Absolutely true.
Yeah. Do we actually get to the five operating systems, or do we get sidetracked?
Yeah. So of the five operating systems, so there's going to be three that are rejection oriented on the right hand side, and then there are two that are abandonment oriented on the left hand side. Essentially, if you look at the center of the spectrum, the very center I call the circle of complacency. So typically, this is where whatever happened in the childhood environment made the adult play it safe and not take much risk. There's also not a lot of reward. Their lives are very mundane, very boring, very repetitive. And typically I don't see them come to me for help until they've got empty nest or if they get laid off or have some sort of midlife crisis. Because somebody like that, they're highly likely to have the same job for 30 years, have the same wife for 30 years, right? Everything just stays super consistent. Now, if you go outside of that, if you go to the left, we've got a brain pattern type that I described for you and I, where the name itself won't really mean anything to anybody because they're it would be like me speaking Chinese when no one speaks Chinese. But in essence, what this pattern does is like all abandonment patterns, they're naturally a little distrusting of other, right? It's kind of like, let me figure it out. They're much more likely to have a high level of pattern recognition. They try to step in and solve problems to a point where this particular pattern type tends to be very self sacrificial. So it's not like I'm sacrificing for myself to get something in return. They're just willing to put themselves in harm's way over and over again. And this pattern type actually struggles with self preservation. So they'll like keep doing things for other people, even if their physical emotional bank account is in deficit, to go back to your bank account, because they see a problem and they want to fix it. They see that somebody's down and they want to help. But that can have a dark side too, because we can then enable people to stay stuck. We can be overly available. People can start taking advantage of us. So if you go now one more to the left, this is where you see more control oriented responses. So instead of like being spontaneous and free and being overly available and self sacrificial, now you see this switch to right next to this pattern, the first chunk of it. They're going to appear that way. They might appear easygoing and self sacrificial, but they're actually more resentful about it inside of their mind. So they're doing it to control or manipulate somebody. They're not doing it because they actually really see value. So that's kind of what shifts is that the pattern type that's closer to the center, which is what I am, I'm not doing it because I want something in return. I'm not doing it to control somebody. I'm doing it because I'm trying to like help save somebody. That shifts when you go to the left, where the behaviors look similar, but they're doing it for self in some way rather than for other. Because they believe if I can do this for you, you're gonna do something for me in return. Then if you go one more, we have a pattern type that I just refer to as switch, which means that depending on either the person or how deep they are in the relationship in terms of security, they will pivot from a more covert control strategy, like what we just talked about, to an overt control strategy. So, an example of this that's really common is in intimate relationships. Sometimes people, when they're going into the relationship, they're very agreeable. They highlight their best self. Sure, honey, whatever you want. Everything's easygoing, right? Everything's great. Whatever you want. I like what you like. And then what happens? As soon as there's like real commitment on board and the relationship is secure, all of a sudden that person that was like, sure, honey, whatever you want, is now nitpicking and micromanaging. Where are you going? Why didn't you call me back? So they're pivoting from covert control really just to control the other person and kind of get what they want. And now that they have you, turns out, well, really who they actually are at their core is micromanaging, overtly controlling, all of those things. So that's probably the most common for that pattern type. And then if you go all the way out to that left-hand side, then we have those who just are purely overtly controlling. They're very quick to critique, to micromanage, to correct. They're typically lacking a communication filter, so there's no thought about how can I best articulate this to help you. Everything's just like, I see something that's wrong and I'm pointing out what's wrong. We've all met people like this for sure. So an example would be, let's say we talked about this person in the middle that's kind of more naturally the self-sacrificial type. The self-sacrificial type typically ends up this way because they have a parent that's a little bit more that way, where they're trying to pivot and walk on eggshells to figure out how do I keep the situation de-escalated if somebody's just always like popping off and something's always wrong. So we in the center left learn how to placate and help other people stabilize their emotions. So we kind of have a stabilizing sort of effect out in the world. So another word that could work here would be like a mediator or a peacekeeper. So typically the mediator, peacekeepers, stabilizers are kind of toward that middle left. And then as you go all the way out to the side, we talked about some of the presentations that may appear more like schizophrenia or paranoia. That's where somebody can become so overtly controlling that they've isolated themselves, and then they can slip off the end and lose touch with physical reality. So then if you go to the right-hand side, the very first pattern in the center, I teach something called the mirror effect. So if this brain pattern spectrum can be divided in half, basically an equal opposite might look similar out in the world, but what's driving their operating system from behind the scenes is going to be very different. So this would be like a person's underlying motivations or goals that you're not overtly aware of. They would be different even if the two people's behavior looked similar. So if, let's say we're kind of like 5 clicks to the left, 5 clicks to the right might look similar in terms of observation, but what their underlying goals are, why they're doing it, what's driving the behavior will be very different. So that right side, that kind of first chunk, this is a pattern that is relatively blended because they still have a little bit of situational awareness, not as much as the left side, but they're not completely out of touch. They're not completely fixated on what others are thinking and feeling, but they've got a kind of equal balance of both. This is where you see a lot of Indian culture and Chinese culture where it's very performance oriented. They're not, they're not like, they're aware and they're tough. They'll appear like aware and tough, but they're very performance oriented and they care a lot about like duty and respect and honor and like giving honor to their family name. But ultimately what's different, because remember I said these would be similar, they can be self-sacrificial and they can like do what needs to be done, but they're doing it for like the honor of their family, and it ends up kind of reflecting back to self. I'm not doing this for your good. I'm doing this for my good. Like I have to do this for like my personal duty or honor. So that's where it shifts. So behaviorally somewhat similar, but what drives it is very different. And if you know what drives a person, then and only then can you actually effectively rewire their behavior. If you're trying to rewire behavior by talking about the behavior, you're so far down the line that that's never going to work. That's where we get into like awareness and willpower, not effective strategies. You have to hack how their brain is perceiving reality and then acting on those deeper motivations, many of which a person is in self-deception about. They're not actively aware of them. They don't really understand why they're doing what they're doing. They're just justifying it. Then if you go over a little bit more to the right, then we have pattern types that are completely fixated on what others are thinking about them. They've lost touch with situational awareness. These are where we see a cluster of personality disorders like covert narcissism, borderline personality disorder, where they project their insecurities onto somebody else and act as if those things objectively took place. I don't know if you've ever met a person like this, but this is where you leave something and their story is like, what? I'm sorry, what did you just say? God, I wish there was a God replay because that is not what happened at all. So that's going to be So for somebody with borderline personality disorder, this would be called splitting. Like, so the mechanism would be splitting as soon as they're faced with something that makes them feel insecure or shame, their reality, their perception of reality splinters or fractures, and they split off into this alternate reality that is completely distorted and not what you or I might have observed. Then if you go one over to the farthest right, this is called a chaos rejection pattern. So ultimately, the people that are all the way over on the right, they just believe there's no point in anything. Everything is futile. They don't care what anybody thinks, but not because they don't care what anybody thinks only because it just feels like everything's some like big joke and a setup. But
Mm.
ultimately, they also believe that everyone hates them and thinks they're disgusting. So there's this kind of like self-disgust. So often we see those people take on counterculture. So that's where you see people that will like start to dress a certain way, like goth, or like dye their hair all these different colors because they're like, you're gonna hate me anyways, so like fuck it, I'm just gonna like fully embody this. So that's where you see people where they say they don't care, but there was definitely a point where they cared so much that they became this sort of counterculture, fuck the world, just as a survival mechanism. And they're typically the ones that end up becoming more dependent, have a hard time getting a job, et cetera, et cetera. So those are kind of in broad strokes, those are the five groupings. There are subtypes from within that, and we would define those subtypes based on an additional, um, basically like 5 to 6 markers that span from how a person is going to move through their emotional state and then how their behaviors actually cascade over time. So overall, there's 9 markers, 2 that are very internal that are going to help us understand their underlying motivations and their patterns of self-deception, 3 that are going to tell us how their body reacts biochemically throughout this sequence, and then 4 that show us how their behaviors will manifest in physical reality throughout that sequence.
Mm. Yeah, very interesting because like what you said at the beginning when we talked about mental health issues, it's like getting to the complete root of it instead of, showing up to a fucking doctor's office and them giving you a pill and saying, "Oh, you're good to go." Like it's like in I'm going to be very clear in certain circumstances, medication can be extremely helpful. Of course,
Great.
I always feel like I have to add this fucking caveats because you have to mention everything, all people, all the time. When I talk about boys, you have to talk about girls. It's like no, it doesn't make sense for anyways. Sorry, that's just me
No,
being
I'm with you. I get it. There are instances, but it's used far too much as a blanket,
yeah.
and that is detrimental to society.
Yeah, we got to look at all these other things that are way more important. Like what's going on with your life? How is your home life? How do you feel? What are you eating? How are you sleeping? How are you moving? How are you thinking? All of these other things. And then if you exhaust every single option possible over a long period of time, then okay. And like you still have maybe suicide ideation or like you still feel like you want to die, okay, then cool. Let's like add another layer to this because of course we want to keep you alive and we want you to flourish and all those sorts of things. But it has to
Hmm.
start with the root of like everything, like you're talking about. So using the information you have, then it seems to be much easier to get to that root if they know some of these things that you're trying to discuss.
Absolutely.
Yeah, great. And you've mentioned self-deception a couple times, and you said there's a positive and a negative part of that. I don't think people would realize that because self-deception seems like it has like a negative connotation, just generally speaking. But what are the positives and the negatives?
So, interestingly enough, positive self-deception can still create a negative outcome. So, you're not entirely wrong in that it feels like it's just like it has a sinister connotation. Self-deception is when the way that we're perceiving reality sets up a pattern of justifications, excuses, or rationalizations that make us feel comfortable with destroying ourselves. So I'll give you an example of something that sounds positive but can still technically do damage. So for me, my brain, no matter what, I always believe I'm going to figure it out. Well, guess what? Sometimes I probably shouldn't. What if I'm trying to figure out something that is actually somebody else's job?
Mm.
What if I'm trying to figure something out, but at the expense of damaging my relationship with my husband? Because one thing that I'm notorious for is, when you believe that you're going to figure you're going to figure things out no matter what, time management is usually not your jam because you're going to look at 10 things and be like, somehow I can get all these 10 things done in the next hour. And then like if there is a narrator, the narrator would be like, she in fact will not get these things done in an hour without pissing somebody off, right? So while you might say, I got to figure these things out because I got to do this for this person, what if that makes me late for family dinner? What if in doing this, I show up late for a client? So there's always going to be benefits and deficits to everything that we're doing. So while that sounds inherently good on its face, it actually is something that has done a lot of damage in my life historically. So it's looking at what these patterns are so I can figure out when to actually let this be the operating rule that I use for this moment, and when to say, oh, I can figure this out. I know how to do it, and I really want to help this person right now, but I really value my husband and family dinner, and I'm really sorry, but I can't do this right now. If you just let the rule be a rule without looking at the exceptions and understanding when to be presently in the moment to weigh in other things, that's where we start to get ourselves into trouble. And our brain does look for things that feel like a rule where it's such a deeply ingrained pattern that we don't realize we could actually in that moment say, actually, I can't do this. I really wish I could. I want to, but I can't. And that's something that I've had to break in myself because I don't see that moment. I'm so quick to say yes. I'm so quick to overextend myself that trying to get my way out of that has been challenging. So that's something that sounds positive but can still do damage. Negative self-deception is where our brain will highlight risks. So positive self-deception, your brain is highlighting reward and minimizing risk. And then with negative self-deception, it's doing the exact opposite. It's maximizing risk and then minimizing your perception of the reward. So in a way, with negative self-deception, this is where, of course, we're going to be more negative. We're going to focus on like the what ifs, what could go wrong, catastrophizing, maybe thinking that somebody's cheating on us when, somebody like me would never think that in a million years, where they're kind of like looking for these subtle little things and be like, well, based on the tonality of your text and how you just looked at me, you're obviously cheating on me. And you or I would be like, wait, what are you talking about? So that would be more of a negative, where somebody's brain is kind of like pulling in these pieces of information from their environment and really like focusing on the risk over everything else. Where for someone like you or I, we would know, okay, well, you're introducing conflict and fight all the time because you're afraid that your partner's going to do XYZ, but by doing this, you're actually causing the relationship to fail. So you or I would see that, whereas that person, they're completely blind to it. They're like, if I don't address this right now, my relationship could go away. But guess what? That is typically what will make your relationship end, and that person can't see it. They're blind to it.
Mm.
So each pattern, each of these five will have their own very specific set of self-deceptive tendencies, which I detail at length in my book. So once you know your pattern, you can go there and be like, damn, that's spot on. Yep, I do that, I do that, I do that. And it'll show you where your brain is using this in a way that's good, that's creating positive outcomes. And it's also going to show you where this is actually setting you up for failure or damaging relationships or potentially putting too much strain on your body. A lot of people, for example, with our brain pattern type, in particular women, tend to have autoimmune disease because you keep saying yes, you keep overloading, but you're also not really practicing self-care. You're not doing anything to, you've gotten so good at managing stress, like emotionally, but really your body is still actually in chronic stress. You're just mentally, you've worked your way through it. So I don't, like for me, I don't feel stressed, but is my body technically experiencing stress markers? Yeah, probably. So that's where we can have these things where if I don't become aware of it and learn how to oppose that pattern and keep it in check, even if it's not destroying my life, it could destroy my body if I'm not careful, because there are all these levels to it. So with self-deception, we all experience it. No one gets out of this without a self-deceptive pattern. And when we can learn how to identify it and start to see the errors or where we should actually lean on the exception rather than the rule, then and only then can we really heal in a sustainable way. And this doesn't require willpower or awareness, because we're actually, with the method that I created and that I teach, we're addressing those like deeper underlying motivations where the client themselves might be in self-deception, not even aware that they're doing it. But when you piece out all of the information, they see it for the first time, and then you start to strategically rewire the language that your brain is using. Because every time we're perceiving reality, like just scan your room for a second. Every time you're scanning the room, your brain is generating language like light, purse, Aaron, right? Every time you see something, your brain is going to define it somehow. at that moment that we are defining, right after that, there's a cascade of other language that follows that's going to be almost like an operating manual of what to do based on what I just perceived. We address the language that your brain is generating that many of us just kind of tune out from. We don't think about it, we overlook it, we focus on something else. That language is the key to our permanent rewiring.
Hmm. Back to the base jumping example, isn't a version of positive self-deception like basically saying that you can just do the thing even though you've never done this thing before? Isn't that sort of a version of what you're talking about?
Yeah, for some people for sure. And I think, when it comes to some extreme athletes that I've met in my life, they're not necessarily hitting the gym, eating healthy. A lot of them are taking bong rips and not working out. So for them, that would be more positive self-deception, right? Like they really might not have the physicality or the what's the word I'm looking for? Like the discipline to carry out that trick, and yet they believe that they're going to figure it out anyways. I think for a lot of us, something like base jumping, the way I like to look at the base jumping thing is, of course, yes, there's still absolutely risk involved there. It's a dangerous sport. But to me, if you methodically packed your parachute and you actually did everything you could to mitigate that risk before you walked up to the edge, to me that's no longer positive self-deception. It kind of is more like commitment and courage. Like, could
Mm.
I die? Yeah, but I did the steps required to get myself here. So then I feel like we cross away from positive self-deception more into like radical accountability. Like, did I do the things on this checklist to be capable of pulling this off? So another example that might help people, and this kind of stuff drives me nuts, but when you see a lot of the people that are kind of in like the law of attraction manifestation, where it's like, go on, babe, if you just like imagine that you're capable of being a millionaire, then you're totally going to be a millionaire. That is positive self-deception that I think can be dangerous and very detrimental in our world. I'm a firm believer that this is why when we talked about kind of the break parenting keystones, why I think the ability to accurately self-measure is so important. Being able to say, yes, I think I can do that, but let me see if I've actually checked these boxes to truly be an expert, to build these skills. Like, do I have habits that reinforce this? Did I go to the gym? Like, if I'm going to do this big extreme sport thing, like, am I taking bong rips or am I going in the infrared sauna? Like, am I doing lines of Coke or am I eating really healthy food? Right. So I think there has to be this, like, yes, it's good to have a positive outlook and believe you can pull something off. But we need to be able to balance that with, have I earned the real life skills? Am I like working on becoming an expert in this field? Because it doesn't take long to find people that are pretending they're experts out on social media that have just done this kind of law of attraction manifestation thing. And not only are they not experts, they don't have really any foundational understanding to be doing anything that they're doing. And then they actually potentially put other people in harm's way, all just because, babe, if you believe you can be a millionaire, then you can. So
Yeah.
that kind of thing drives me nuts. And to me, that's just positive self-deception without any of the work and the grit that it takes, I think, to truly be an expert.
Yeah, I mean, one of the most dangerous mindsets to have is this idea of naive optimism. Like, it's all going to
Yeah.
work out, it's all going to be just fine. That's fucking dangerous. What if you're in a horrible situation and you're just like, yeah, it's all going to be fine? No, it's not. You can be optimistic, but it has to be through the proper work, effort, attention, and focus that
Mhm.
you think things might work out for the best, not just as like this like
Which is
naive
that
optimism.
middle left side spectrum that we were talking about, where it's like for me, I have a positive outlook, but I also am like super motivated. I hold myself radically accountable. I'm constantly trying to make myself better. And I do think, for example, with sports, I was a competitive skier. Getting real time feedback where it's like, for us, every time we'd be out there doing runs, they'd project our run on a huge, massive screen TV in front of all of our peers and sit there and like tear you to shreds. And you're like, okay, okay, yes, I can get better. I can get better. Well, there's something about that builds you up. And I do constantly try to do better. When I do a podcast interview, I force myself to watch it so I can say, could I have articulated that better? Could I have said less ums or ahs? Could I have taken more of a pause there? that is, I think, what is required for us to be optimistic, but also back that up with grit and skill. That really, unfortunately, many of the right side spectrum ones, they're the ones that are looking for the cheat code or the easy way to become a millionaire without the emotional resilience and the grit and the skill. And self-awareness or self-reflection is challenging there because their parents have likely spoken something into them that has made them deluded about who they are and what they're capable of.
Yeah. Is this idea of self-deception is why you titled the book the way you did?
It is. I think self-deception is actually the number one cause of mental illness, and it's why our mental health crisis is as bad as it is. And for whatever reason, I can't tell you why. I have some ideas. In the traditional mental health paradigm, they minimize the impact of self-deception and almost treat it like a taboo word that is not to be spoken of, which is ultimately why in the way that I do things, I tripled down and said, nope, I'm not backing down on this one. I know it is the number one problem we as human beings face on a daily basis. And if we can help a person become aware of that distortion and how to overcome it, our world can look drastically different. Because when you overcome it, you can become empathetic for other people. You can collaborate with other people. I like to think of a lot of the way the traditional mental health paradigm just puts these labels on people is telling you, you live in Russia, you live in China. That is a big country. Like ADHD is a big country. Bipolar is a big country. When you do brain pattern mapping with what we do, it would be like giving you your precise longitude and latitude and saying, okay, healing is at this longitude and latitude.
Mm.
Here's where you are. You now know exactly how to get there. You're not just like being told you're randomly in this massive country. We don't know where, you're just somewhere in there. Healing is going to be impossible. And collaboration and healing in an interpersonal sense is also going to be impossible. But if I know exactly where Aaron is on his longitude and latitude, and I know where I am on my longitude and latitude, I know exactly how you're seeing things, so I know how to communicate to you so that you understand me and we can collaborate. And we now know exactly where we need to go to be in that healed state. So I think the ability to very specifically, like down to those nine markers, help you see exactly where your brain is distorting reality so that you can get out of it. It literally is like seeing objective reality for the first time. And I think the idea of objective reality has been incredibly under attack over the last like 5 to 7 years, right? Reality is what you make of it. There is an objective reality, and if we all heal, we can actually perceive that together as a collective. And I think that is when humanity will change drastically. And I know that's the work that I'm here to do, and I won't stop until we get there or die, whichever one comes first.
Yeah. Well, we appreciate you. Is there anything we didn't touch on or I didn't ask you that you definitely do want to mention?
Brain pattern mapping only takes 20 minutes, so you can do it on my website. It takes 20 minutes to actually do the online diagnostic, and then you'll meet with somebody on our team that actually goes through the diagnostic with you and kind of explains what's going on under the hood. Even if your life is great, there's so much insight that you can gain from understanding what made you who you are and why you operate this way and where you can still have blind spots that becoming aware of them can make your life even better, even if your life is great. And my book comes out on June 3rd on Amazon and all other retailers. So if you could do me a favor, if you're interested in any of the things I talked about today, put it in your calendar, go buy it on June 3rd. That helps our book go up the ranks, and I would greatly appreciate it.
Fuck yeah. I
And
have
the
one
book's
more
called
thing.
Your Brain is a Filthy Liar.
What's that? Yeah.
And the book's called Your Brain is a Filthy Liar.
100%. Yeah, I'll link below. I have one more thing to ask you. This has nothing to do with
Mhm.
anything that we talked about. So just be
Go for it.
prepared. Have you ever watched like WWE or like professional wrestling?
Yes.
You have the most perfect wrestling name of all time.
Right?
Just so you know, because I used to do that for a profession, and
Okay.
oh yeah, yeah. We could talk about that maybe another time. But
Yeah.
coming up with a fucking wrestling name is so hard. And
What was yours?
mine was Jackson Stone.
Oh, yeah. Jackson Stone. That was a good one.
Yeah.
I feel like the wrestling names always kind of sound like porn star names, too.
I mean, a
Yeah.
little bit. They got to be able to be like a little bit rhythmic. You got to be able to chant them. They got to be kind of
Mhm.
cool. They maybe got to go fit together in like a nice logo. But your normal name is the coolest name. I knew a wrestler
It
named
was, it
Dusty
was a cool
Gold.
name with
So
an athlete too, because when then the announcers saying it, everyone's like, "Ooh, who's that?" So my name has served me very well in my life. I love my name,
yeah,
and actually now technically my last name is McKay legally because I'm married, but publicly, Bizzie Gold has stuck for so long that I can't suddenly be Busy McKay.
yeah. Especially as a skier, because that's like a very unique
Mhm.
sport with a very unique, cool name. So,
Yeah, Busy
and
Gold on
yeah,
course. I've heard that probably 100,000 times in my life.
yeah. Now on the cover of a book, ready to go. It's fucking sweet.
Hmm.
But
Definitely.
yeah, thank you. This is a pleasure. I appreciate you spending time with me. And
And when's
yeah,
your baby due?
September 25th.
Ooh, awesome. I'm really excited for you. Being a parent is the most healing experience in the world, and I think everyone should do the work to heal themselves, and whether or not you want to have kids or you've got a lot of friction about maybe being afraid to have kids, when you do the work to heal yourself, I really do believe that it is the most important next step in your evolution, and there's so many lessons that you can't learn any other way.
Yeah,
So I really encourage people make babies, get married, embody some of those traditional aspects of family and marriage because they are absolutely our best teachers in the world, and without them we often end up a little bit emotionally and mentally stunted. So do it, get married, have babies. It's the best.
fuck yeah. Couldn't agree more. It's been the marrying my wife was the easiest and best decision I ever made, and then wanting to start a family with her was also the same thing.
Hmm.
And yeah, just God willing, we have everyone's healthy when it happens,
Hmm.
and we'll do the best we can. So it'll be fucking sweet.
Amen. Well, thank you so much for having me.
Anytime. Thank you very much for tuning into that episode. And if you enjoyed it, click right here for another full-length episode of the podcast. And please don't forget to subscribe. But most importantly, above all else, please take good care of yourselves and others. And I'll see you next time. Lots of love. Cheers.